Welcome to a special edition of Designing Hollywood podcast focused on the Costume Designers Guild Local 892's fight for pay equity. I am your host, Phillip Boutté Jr., and today's episode is sponsored by the Costume Designers Guild Pay Equity Committee. Designing Hollywood podcast show is dedicated to all things movies and its industry professionals. Let me start by introducing my guest today. First up, we have costume designer Daniel Selon. He is known for WandaVision and the upcoming Agatha Darkhold Diaries. He has become a great friend and mentor as we work together on the DC feature Blue Beetle. And lastly, we have a lovely, talented national treasure that needs very little introduction, but I will try. She's a 3-time Emmy-nominated actor for Transparent, Tiny Beautiful Things, and WandaVision. You have also seen her work in Bad Moms, The Shrink Next Door, and you've heard her voice in Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse and Bob's Burgers. She's made me personally laugh for a long time, and I'm excited to have her here and to see her new show. It was Agatha all along. Agatha Darkhold Diaries. Please welcome Kathryn Hahn to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. Lovely introductions, Phil.
Thank you very much. So the first thing I want to get into is we are talking about basically this episode is sponsored by the Costume Designers Guild Pay Equity Committee. And we're talking about pay equity today. And I want to get into what that is and what that entails. So I'm going to pass it to Daniel to provide us an overview of Pay Equity Now campaign and the current state of gender pay disparity within the Costume Designers Guild.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad that we could get together like this today and have this conversation because, with two people that I respect so deeply, and each of you are pillars in your specific, niche in the industry. It's a really big thing happening right now, and it's a big thing that's been happening for a long time. There is a great gender disparity, and brass tacks, women are paid less than men. And costume designers make a lot less than their creative department head counterparts. And so, looking at trying to bring us all into the modern age and equal pay for equal work, for just as a matter of comparison, another position on a film crew that is imperative to the making of the product is a production designer, right? They create the environments and they design the sets, which is an enormous part of the world building. And then we collaborate directly with them and we create the characters inside those spaces. And production designers are predominantly male, and costume designers are actually 87% female is our identifying membership. And we are paid nearly 30% less than production designers per week, which is kind of like a mind-blowing fact. Yeah. And that has a lot of historical context in that, costumes has been viewed as pink collar work and women's work, and just imagined as sort of like women shopping. They're just dealing with clothes. They just
sewing circles.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like,
correct.
It's like this idea that the women will just take care of it and they'll kind of go away and bring something back. And, so that has been pervasive in the industry, and we've ended up here. And a little bit of historical context for the union itself. The Costume Designers Guild, which is Local 892, that represents costume designers, assistant costume designers, and costume illustrators, which Phillip is one of. He's also classified as an assistant costume designer, and we work together in that capacity so beautifully. Those members of the Costume Designers Guild are part of IATSE. And when we joined IATSE, which is the umbrella the umbrella union, the costume designers were paid, I think, about $357 a week less than the production designers. And when you think about every 3 years, the contracts, 3% is the raise. And so over the time, this exponential gap has grown. And so every year or every 3 years, when the contracts are renegotiated, that gap grows. And so it's time to bring the women up to pace with, their creative counterparts. And so I think, a big part of why we're doing this now and why the Costume Designers Guild is leading this charge is because we're not the only gender inequity that exists in the industry. Literally every lane you could identify somewhere that women haven't been given the same opportunities, or they haven't been given the same leadership positions and have been paid less. And so there's actually only 31% of the industry are female. That's like 31% of the people working in Hollywood and all of the entertainment industry are women, even though the population of the United States is like 51% female. So it's a really good example of how far behind the industry is. And yet, we have incredible people like you, Kathryn, who are a leader in your space, and you are a respected actor who has had lots of different experiences. And, I'm happy to have this conversation with you and just wonder, how do those facts land with you? And what does that bring up?
Well, a couple things. First of all, I haven't really met a costume illustrator before, and I'm in awe of what you do always. I want to have a room.
Thank you very much.
I am always in awe. So thank you on behalf of everybody for your beautiful mind. Secondly, I think I had done a video for our mutual friend, Mary Schley. I think it was a good couple of years ago. Or maybe it was last year, but it's a fog, but so I cannot believe that this is still, not only is it not happening or being achieved, the just fair equity, but it seems to be getting, like you said, the gap seems to be widening, which is very disappointing. And also that figure that only 30, did you say 30% are women?
31% of the industry are female.
Well, that is also very shocking, because I think that women are really good at letting not just women, any unrepresented group is kind of really good at letting their voices be very heard. And so you think that a lot of change is happening. But to know that is underneath it all, that there's still, the needle isn't really pushing forward is well, I'm hopeful, but I'm also, it is a real good wake up call. And that's why I'm very, I know that there's a strike looming potentially. And so I hope that everyone gets their shit together and sees that it's for real, and that, your sister and brother unions have your back after what, we all went through last year, for sure.
I'd say that the gender,
a huge part of it. Oh, sorry, Phil. But I just was jumping in and saying, I think that that solidarity is such a big part of it, right? When you guys were on your SAG-AFTRA strike and coupled with the WGA strike, it effectively shut down all the work for all of us, but we were able to be there in support of you and, say we believe that you guys should get everything that you're asking for. And I feel having worked on the pay equity committee and all of this campaign for the last 5 years, I do feel we have great support. We have the verbal, intention from our brothers, sisters, kin in both SAG-AFTRA, WGA, and across the board at IATSE, the other 12 locals. There's 13 locals that make up the Hollywood 13. We have the support. And so I feel really hopefully, we are very hopeful that we don't have to strike. And we have, for the first time ever, been able to get our act together and have a lot of cross-table conversations about what do we need? What are our problems? What are your problems? How can we support each other in the negotiation room? And that unity is new and fresh. And so
it is, because can you give me a little history of what's been going down? When did your campaign start, and what started that? And when was the last, it was longer than 5, or was it 5 years ago?
So interestingly, the Costume Designers Guild went into the negotiation table and asked for pay equity in 2002. So 22 years ago. Yep. And we were essentially laughed out of the room. Because they were just what are you talking about?
On your own, not with the rest of the...
Correct. Yeah, because each of the locals negotiates on their own separately and then also together. And so in that individual negotiation, it was completely dismissed. So here we are 22 years later, still fighting for the same thing, you know, and as we're doing research and we're putting these graphs together, you know, we even made a graph where you show like where everyone is in the hierarchy of pay, and costume designers are the lowest paid creative department head of all departments. That includes cinematography, directing, editing, sound. We are right below craft service. And God bless our craft service people, because we wouldn't be able to make a movie without them. We need them. They are therapy and they are nourishing to us. But
yes, they are. But it's a circus, and every piece is. We couldn't. I mean, this is so appalling to me. And I think I had said this with Marie too. Is that you're caught as a performer and as an audience member. Like going into a fitting is like Christmas morning to me. I find this person because through what is on those racks, because I know that the conversations you have had with the director, with the writer, have been so on a different level, like there's something like poetic about what that exchange is. So something that can't be, that maybe she or he, the director, can't put into words, you're able to translate into fabric. And so I can almost like get on the same page so faster with seeing that rack and putting those clothes on. It's like we're like all of a sudden one as a production, as a vision. Like I can see exactly where this is going. So like and for me, you know, production, just all these things are so equally as important. But as an actor, this is like hair, makeup, costume are you hear actors talking about putting the shoes on and finding it's that first step before looking at the other actor's eyeballs that you're like, okay. And then you take that feeling of that first fitting into like whatever that next chapter of building that person is. And because you can't do it in a vacuum, but it is that incredible, intangible bridge between like what you've got brewing in your head and entering into that space that is the world that is being created for you to walk into it. Like it's like, I can't imagine it. Like it tightens and edits your imagination to exactly who the bird is that you're being asked to play. And it's the biggest gift. I love collaborating with a costume designer. I mean, it really does make me want to cry. Like it's such a sacred relationship, because it's the closest also that someone is to your physical person, to like actually like, how does this person breathe? How do they move? How do they talk? And like, it's not like we're talking about that. It just happens because of the clothes. Like no one needs to overthink it or over anything. It's just organically starts to happen. And anyway, it's just an appalling thing to me.
I could speak to this a little bit too. I wanted to say, especially from what you just said, it's nice to hear the passion in your voice about that collaboration, because pretty much what we've always said is costume design is character design, right? It's the first stage in figuring out the character. From an illustrator perspective, I know that to be true. I got into this specifically a long roundabout way, but I was an actor from like 3 until about 17. So I was working and doing my work and all of those things, right? Going auditioning, and I loved it. But the reason I stopped was because
he was in Lamb Chop. Phillip was in the show. I idolized him as a little kid. And when we were adults and we discovered this information, I had to lay down on the ground.
No, I might pass out right now from a lot of but
Sorry, Phil. We had to just drag
that
up
is
your farm
It's okay.
there is a constant laptop happening in our house nonstop. We'd love those toys for the dogs.
So now I always joke. Go back and watch it again, and the little black kid is me. So now you will know.
You really buried the lead, Phil. That is pretty amazing. Someone should intro you.
Well, I buried it only
Yes.
because it's one of those things that for me, the reason I switched out of it was because I've told Daniel this and a lot of people, but it was the diversity of roles as I became a teenager. I was very, it was a horrible way to find out, like kind of the way of the world, but I got really angry because the roles I was being offered were very stereotypical and I just didn't want to represent Black men on TV that way, like in that quantity, right? So coming from that background, and then eventually, you know, I went and I was production designing. So I was doing big music videos, which is why I know all of the different directors and things like that. Once I moved into that and the storytelling aspect and found costume, that's where it felt most natural to me, because coming from an actor's brain, I remembered what it was like to craft a character, which is why I think costume design is so important. And which is why it's really weird to me that we're having this kind of pay equity discussion in the sense of like honoring the work of costume designers, you know, in the sense that it's the thing you go to the movie to see. We are watching the actors, we are watching the character, we are watching the costume. So I just wanted to make that point clear, and hearing you talk about how the fitting room.
It's in the primetime Oscars. You see the costume designer, like that is. It is proof that is an integral part of the texture of a movie. Like an actor cannot dress themselves and be expected to walk in to the world that is created. No matter how many great ideas they have, there is a world that they have to fit into. Like there's got to be, like, there's no, and the director, it's a skill that is, and a craft that nobody can do. It's a from like,
That's
you know,
key.
the big incredible world building, you know, mythologically huge archetypal, you know, costumes that Daniel has been able to build on, you know, Agatha, and that we worked together with Mayas for WandaVision, which was like incredible to watch that happen. Because sometimes you see it and you're like, I see it, but then you realize, like, oh my God, now I see that all the time. And it's so hard to remember that someone is behind that, like, that you're going to see in perpetuity, like forever and ever and ever and ever, that image. And whether it's that or someone that is, and then the dexterity you have to be able to go from that into just like what they say is street clothes, which is always funny to me.
I appreciate that.
Nothing easy about street clothes. Like, that's very difficult to just to actually find like someone that is just living their life in like a lived in, not straight out of an REI catalog way. That's like truly, and it, you know, also to still fit in the tone of, and the kind of, you know, whatever patina of the world that's being created. I'm really, I'm like, this just makes, I understand why this would be, I just understand the absurdity. I mean, because it is absurd. It's absurd.
I think that there's something interesting, like we're all sort of stunned, right? Like we're experiencing shock around these facts and this injustice.
I don't think many people know this.
No, and they don't. And, you know, which is also interesting. And that speaks to how I think we, as people, and certainly in like the art as commerce field, are conditioned to not talk about money or not talk about how we're compensated, or like, and also understanding just the actual valuation of what we contribute. So like you, national treasure Kathryn Hahn, bring an nearly invaluable, you know, necessary component to a project where the project will go or not go if you're involved. And that's
we'll see.
I'm blowing you up. And the costume designer, conversely, is essentially a daily hire. So like I am hired, they could fire me on a Thursday if I had, established costumes on a Wednesday. And, we just looking out at sort of what we create a lot of IP, right? So we develop like the incredible costume designer Maya C. Rubeo, who designed costumes in WandaVision, and I assisted her. And Phillip and I have both worked with her on Blue Beetle.
She's incredible.
She gave birth to your character, Agatha, in WandaVision. And that, exists in toys and Halloween costumes and posters and, every manner of that stuff. But the costume designer is completely cut out of any kind of what's considered points or any revenue that's created post-production. So, anything that we create is owned by the studio, and we don't see a penny of that. So like anything that's sold is, completely past us, and we are a hired gun.
Off. Yeah, that's something is off there in the system completely. Yeah.
I want to draw back to something Kathryn said earlier too, just to double down on that, which was she brought it back to the work, meaning that not everyone can do that job. It's not a job like, oh, I like clothes, so I guess I'll be a costume designer. There's an actual work there. There's design process, there's historical context, there's taking something that exists and bumping it up into real life. And then there's the collaboration with the actor themselves and kind of that relationship forming to figure out who this character is. And so I think it's really important for people to also understand so much goes into what you see before you get to that final product that everyone just reacts to, right?
So much. It's like, because it is really that's where like true collaboration happens. It's always like but usually when it's like sings between an actor and a costume designer, which I feel like we're like so blessed that we have had this from the very beginning. It's like, we both kind of know when it's working and know, like, we're like, or we know when it's like, let's try something else. Like, it's like a very instant, like, and that's always the best feeling when you're like, just no one's, it's just, there's just literally no ego. And it's just like, that works and that doesn't, because your gut just tells you. And it's just the best feeling. And you're right. It's not fashion design. It's not like, it's not styling. This is like a different, it's an art. It's an artistry. I mean, when I think about like the tailors or the, I don't want to say, what is the like non-genderized word for seamstress?
So like the stitchers, we call them stitchers.
That feels much better. The stitchers who like the pride and the work ethic that I have seen in like a costume design studio is beyond. Like, you're like, whoa, it feels, the energy is so focused and so like sacred and meditative, and you could tell the time crunch is happening all the time. It's always time. But like, yet the stuff, I mean, you always are like, oh my God, lights always on for hours. Like, it just feels like we would have fitting, like you guys could do fittings.
Can we talk about some of our first fittings for Agatha without giving away?
Please do.
Yes, remind me.
Can I bring that up, Kathryn? Because you mentioned, like having the stitchers, sort of part of, and the tailors come in to a fitting. So just a little anecdote, like, and where this is a looking ahead to a show that hasn't been released yet, but is going to be a big important one for Kathryn's character, Agatha Harkness. We were having an early fitting for it, and it was sort of the culmination of what would become one of her hero looks. And there was one piece of it that was very labor intensive, and it, had a lot of tailoring, and we really had to get the fit right. And it was, we all kind of knew in this silent, subconscious way that this garment would become a vehicle for the character and for Kathryn. And so we, on the day that we got to put like this more or less, 90% finished version onto her, I had, our head cutter, Taylor, Marilyn Madsen in the room. And then slowly, like, Julie and Louis, all the
Marilyn is
stitchers
amazing.
in from beside the door. And we put it, we had the look on Kathryn. And I mean, you could speak to what that experience was like for you.
Well, I'd never had that experience. So I was so, I feel like that would be, I mean, I think you will probably continue to do that always, because it is, talk about leadership, Daniel, like what a way to make everybody feel in your department feel so included in every stitch, like they're on the screen. Like I would put on these garments, and because I got to see them when they came in, I would feel them all, every time I put that amazing jacket on. And the lights were dim, and it was like we were going to take pictures and, to show to everybody. And, these amazing humans came out, and they were so quiet, and amazing Marilyn. And like, everyone just started crying.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was so, because of how beautiful it was and how personal it was, and how much work it took. And it was like chills for me, because I couldn't believe how much, I guess I never had I never had really like put together how much, of course, that how much work had been involved in what I was putting on. It meant so much. I love that happened, Daniel. I really hope that you continue that if you can, because I think it means a lot for the actor too, just to be like, right, this is like, the next time you want to be like, oh, this itches, or you just want to remember like how many humans, and have, like, as tired as one is, a delicacy to talking about it, because that is some beautiful energy going towards your clothes. You want to,
I mean, fittings with you, Kathryn, are a holy experience for me as the designer, because of what you said earlier of us like having a sort of almost nonverbal ability to communicate about what's feeling right. And so we're experiencing things on sort of multiple strata of like, what's it look like? What does it feel like? What does it mean? And but you bring such a playful and like irreverent energy to the fitting room that this literally our very first.
Not serious.
I mean, wait, I'm sorry. Kathryn Hahn is an incredibly serious person.
She is sure.
I have to make sure that all my ducks are in a row. No, she comes in, she throws her jacket off, she won't let me hang it up. She's and then we were supposed to fit for 3 hours. We fit for 6.
Wow!
Yeah. Because she was
we
like,
just kept going and going.
Let's get to it.
Going, because I couldn't believe how much I didn't want to ever stop, because it's like, it's me as a kid like playing dress up. It's like one of the reasons I want to get into this business. It's like that energy of like, that's what you would do, is play dress up, and that feeling of like being a kid transforming through clothes. It's like,
that's the fun part.
Yes, that's like that was my way in as a kid. It still is. It really is.
I love that. I wanted to say something too before I forget, which is when you're talking about the disparity and kind of like where things are, just from an illustration standpoint or from a concept artist standpoint. One of the things that I did notice too, when you're talking about how important the work is like I've learned about costume a lot through being in the department, right? But one of the things that I will say in terms of even just kind of learning that knowledge and how much the costume designer does, even when I'm doing the same job. So as far as an illustrator goes, we're concept artists are everywhere, right? We're in the art department, we're in props, we're in costume, we're sectioned wherever our specialty is.
Hair, makeup.
Everywhere, right? The problem though is you notice even more how the discrepancy is in pay when you're sectioned in a department. So I can work in costume and I'm being paid less for the same job, same exact job. So not like comparing, you know, costume to production design or
Right.
any other job. I'm doing the
Oh
same
my
job no
God.
matter where I am, but I get paid more in other departments than if I'm in costume. And I was just like, why is that? So we started to go back and forth, and it's pay equity. It literally is the devaluing of this amazing department and the people that work within it and the costume designer and everything trickling down the line and just kind of getting further and further behind, even to the point where the same job is devalued in the department. And I think that's something that's very clear. But it made it more clear to me how important it was to talk about this with everyone, just to show like, okay, I'm doing the same job here, but I can get more money if I do it somewhere else. Right. And I think that that's important thing to do. And talking through that, what I will love about this conversation is just the sheer amount of importance and kind of like reverence that you have for costume. Like it's right there in front of us all, but somehow it gets missed. And I laugh. I told Daniel this story, but I laugh because it's forgetting with the source, right? So people go to the store, they buy a t-shirt, right? But they don't realize someone designed that t-shirt. I saw a Twitter comment at some point and I was like, oh, you poor girl. There was this girl that was just like, I don't even know why we need farmers. You can just go to the grocery store. And I was like, oh, child. Like I literally just, I laughed, but it's that disassociation of not understanding. I hope so too, because the disassociation, but it reminded me of this, which was there's a disassociation from understanding. Like if you go and you're watching Agatha and she's flying around and all that stuff's happening, someone designed that. It's right there in front of you. And yet people just are just like, they almost act like you just went to the Marvel superhero store or something. Like we just bought this real quick. Like there's a lot of work there. And I want to make sure that we're kind of centering in on that and then understanding the value of that.
You bring in such a good point that a costume designer is in constant collaboration. So what you're saying, I want to be really clear. That what you're saying is, as a costume designer, you have to be, to fulfill your job, if you're a good one, constant collaboration with, have to be props, production design, definitely the director, also the hair, also the makeup, because that also completes like, you know, that trilogy. And you're saying that I don't want to see, everyone's embarrassed to talk about money, but are you saying that those departments get paid more than costume design?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
And the reason,
like, let's get to brass tacks.
Yes.
Yeah, brass tacks. And the reason is because historically, most of those positions were predominantly male in the history of Hollywood, the history of filmmaking. And so, bringing it back to the actual, gender disparities that just are existing, it's because that's what we're fighting. And I think that,
like it's antiquated, very antiquated role assignment from old Hollywood back in the day, where now, like, obviously things have, thank God, opened up in many ways in all departments, gender wise. Like there seems to be a lot more flow, except that in this department, it's still being seen almost more in an antiquated way. Like no one will budge. That's so crazy to me.
Correct. And it's right there in front of everyone. It's just like almost like spreading the awareness. Daniel's been really good at getting out there and like verbally kind of making people aware that this is an issue. And we all talk about it from different ways, but it's like, if you really just pare it back and stop for a second, it's kind of a no-brainer, but you have to know the history of it in order to tell people how it happened and then how to correct it. Right.
That it comes from this very, very old Hollywood system. Correct. And that this just has never changed. Right. And it's so nuts. And also that it still is mostly women. I mean, I said I was doing this to a pal this morning and she was like, what? So I sent her the thing that you sent me and she was like, I had no idea. Like well-known performers. Like, I think you just like, everyone's making a thing. It's all like everybody's doing it. Like you said before, like art can sometimes like, you don't want to talk about that stuff because we're all collaborating and building the thing. But I completely hear you. Like, I mean, I heard you when 2 years ago, and I'm excited for you to go back be able to go back to the table this year and with the support of all the other IATSEs and all the other, your sister and brother unions that are going to be like, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's a big year, and I do feel like, there is an air of positivity rather than feeling like the oppression. And I think that what we have is an opportunity, and very valiantly, the Costume Designers Guild is sort of leading the charge for many other groups that are also experiencing this marginalization and this pay inequities of their own stripes. But what we gain by getting pay equity for this group and then this group and then this group is that we shift that tide and we change the history of believing or subconsciously just agreeing to the fact that women are worth less. And we are bringing, to the forefront all of the talents of look at the success that Greta Gerwig brought with Barbie this year. What a massive opportunity to sort of prove that an old IP can be reimagined by a woman, and the story can actually be about what it is to be a woman, and it can have massive appeal.
The version in a pop thing was so thrilling. Really, really thrilling. I'm with you. Yeah. And I feel like, it's interesting because most of my work that I've been able to do or been asked to do in my, I guess, 30s until now has been for the most part, women. I've worked with mostly women directors. There's been a few notable, very awesome men in there, but for the most part, I've just worked with women.
That's amazing.
And I know, it's I take it totally for granted. And so I think even because of that, I forget sometimes that there are people that have never worked with a woman director.
Correct.
Never had so I just take it so for granted because that's just how it's landed, or it's how it's kind of unfolded. But I really wish everybody had a chance. Not that there aren't some good, awesome men out there. There's plenty. I'm married to one. We all know. I mean, look at these two beautiful people. But in terms of, I'm just saying in terms of directors, it's boy, it's a different bird. It just is.
Yeah. And I think my experience, certainly working on Agatha with you, Kathryn, was, we were under the incredible leadership of Jack Schaefer, writer, director, creator, and Mary Lavanos, executive producer, brilliant people, brilliant women who I think went into a project very intentionally. And that's something that I have found in the sphere of working with a lot of women, working in the Costume Designers Guild, the 87% female membership. It's I'm constantly surrounded by fabulous, powerful women. And when in my experience, when women have been handed the reins, they are able to look at something holistically, if almost to bring it to a sort of the carnal experience of motherhood, or that there is this nurturing quality of when women are given the opportunity to be at the helm. There is a full scope of holding and making space for everyone to bring their best. And I think that is something that really is what the future holds for the new generations coming through. And, that is what the future will be. The future will be not just women leadership, but just leadership in general, understanding that every person has a contribution that will be valued. And if you make space for it, the sum of its parts will be greater than the sum of its parts,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's clear that we've got to take care of that 87% of our amazing sisters and also our beautiful 13% of our beautiful others in the costume that are costume designers in your union, because it doesn't make any sense, and it's crazy unfair. And I'm sure, with all these things, it seems just like, well, if no one's saying anything, I guess we'll just keep going. But it's time, and so I'm really psyched that you are making some noise, because I think it's just knowledge. Just people just need to be informed, and then people will just feel like I am. It's a no-brainer. Like, that's just is clear. No one can do it without you.
Do you guys have any thought processes on how to maybe close that pay gap? Like how to really just get in there, or like by the powers that be, like how do we start to think about closing the pay gap?
Yeah, well, I mean, I mean, from where we sit as costume designers, what we're looking towards in our negotiation is to raise our scale rate, because everybody has, an assigned scale rate, and that is where your negotiations on an individual job begin. I would say that more than 50% of our membership negotiate and are paid above scale. But the reality is that scale rate is what their pension and their pension contributions are based on. So even if you negotiate for more money weekly above the scale rate, you're only getting your pension contributions based on the scale rate. So the women, the costume designers, after a 30, 40-year career, end up much worse off with their retirement payout than say a production designer, or even sometimes their costume supervisor, who are represented in a different local 705, the motion picture costumers, because they are paid hourly, we're paid weekly. So they actually sometimes end up with like a better retirement. So it's really just about negotiating for yourself as a costume designer, like having a really strong negotiation techniques, which is something we've been educating our membership about and working at, but also having people like you, Kathryn, loaning your time and your spirit to listening and amplifying this information, and just sharing it among your circles, because it's not always appropriate to be on set. I'm like, we're presenting Kathryn in a new beautiful costume today. And who wants to know about how little I got paid today? You know what I mean? Cool. So
exactly.
I don't do that.
Exactly. I would be like, okay.
We just, we let Kathryn enter set like like the queen witch that she gets to be. And, it's like, we'll talk about the money later. But I think
but I completely hear
you can help us.
Yeah. Amplification and just getting more, before we start working in the morning, just a bullhorn.
Yeah.
But like, I do think awesome, actually. But I do think there would be a lot of sound guys who's like, oh my God, maybe at lunch. But I do think just amplification. I mean, I do feel there is definitely a pay gap. I mean, I'll say even for actors, in every department, everywhere. Like, I mean, I still am definitely told like, oh, you're going to get this part or this movie. We just have to cast the male lead. That is something that I constantly hear if that is the kind of project that I'm up for, which is not like often, but if it's like a, male, female project, it always has to wait until the dude is signed until they get to mine. And so, and then it's like, does she pass muster with the studio? Like, is he cool with it? Like, it's all that stuff. So you do at a certain point sometimes with like these big projects, especially like interacting with, not all the time, but like sometimes like you can feel like still like when you're supposed to fit into some mold, you do sometimes feel like a little bit of a piece of meat that you're just like not. So that's why I think I'm also lucky that I can be a witch.
We are so lucky that you can be a witch.
I would love to see this. I would love to see this conversation happen in the middle of something.
Yeah,
Say it,
exactly.
Kathryn. Say it, Kathryn. What were you going to say?
No, that's it.
Oh.
I was just saying all witches.
Yeah. That's why I said maybe she can broadcast that, Daniel, in the middle of a particular, like a spell, like with the wind machine and the flying, and she's just like, pay the costume designer.
40% less.
Medium shot, super serious. Just like, great.
Like, I'm sorry. This people will come up and be like, I did not see that.
Yes.
And you're, look at the slides with me real fast.
Please just go back to what was written.
Yeah. Okay, got that. No, I mean, the thing is, I love a crew. Like, I mean, don't you? Like, that's like, I just love, I love a crew. I love getting to know a crew. I love that falling in love where everyone all of a sudden is like, and even if it's like the the hours and how tired we are and like like I love that feeling too, because it's so finite. And so even that feels like that's the middle, like the gooey middle where you get closer, and then all of a sudden it starts to be like nostalgic, like you see the end and that feels good for a second, but then it also feels like sad that we're going to not see, like that's not going to ever be the same exact group. And the hours that I'm always like, the hours that those PAs spend because they just love it so much. That gives me like such pause, and gratitude. And to know that like it's just like this has been a real eye opener for me, just knowing, that some of our, brothers and sisters, artists, are just not being compensated for the work that they're doing, as fairly or just equally, just looking for like equal pay. It feels very late 2024 to be still having these conversations.
Yeah, it does. And like if I can reflect back to you, Kathryn, like you say you love a crew, and I've seen that in practice. And like Phillip, I wish you could be there with us, because Kathryn walks into a set, and when number one walks on set, you stand at attention, you're ready, you got to make sure your work is ready to like receive them, and then let's go. Kathryn comes in, and it's like click, 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 click. Like she is like gathering up all of the threads of camera and the ADs and the PAs and the sound. And it's like, she's sort of dragging all these threads into the center of the room and like tying a knot and holding it. And you just like, you sort of like are in the center, but you are also like giving it that like tent pole, like you are holding it up. And I think that kind of leadership is really what we need to be looking for, and what we need, to understand the value in every single department, and to be aware of the painful inequities, but also know that like, if we come together every day and we do it every day, we do it, we will get there.
And the change, I mean, that this just seems so no brainer that I'm just gonna remain optimistic that once more people that are in much more powerful positions than that I could even comprehend really hear this information, then things will start moving very, very fast. People that have, like, let's say, social media, which I do not. Like, I think that people will, like, I think change will start happening, shifts will start happening really fast.
Yeah. I'm going to say too that I
just can't.
I'm going to say that
about anybody.
I'm just going to say that no, that's okay. It's okay, because it was lagging a little bit, but I was going to say that I'm not there with you guys, but I can feel it. I can feel the love between you guys as collaboration. But also, I've always said, especially just in nature of people, right? Everything trickles down from the top. So if number one is coming on set and actually is kind and warm and like, I feel like what I've called it always is I've worked with a couple of designers. I always call my friend Ellen Mirajnik one of them as creative amplifiers, right? I think that term is really important because if you're coming in and you're having, an even tone and you're maintaining kind of this thing, it trickles down to everyone and it makes everyone feel more creative. And I think that's what I'm getting from the two of you guys is that there was a real creative energy there, but it's also just being kind and being nice. It's like, it's not hard to do, It really helps to kind of know that and to push that forward and then to be able to kind of amplify it back out. And now with more information, I think that it really is helpful to know the love that you guys have for the department and then kind of like being able to put that back out. I think everyone will kind of be in a better place if they understand what that means. Just having a good positive attitude and then also kind of respecting each other because the crew really is an important part of that, an integral part of that. And you're right. It only comes together that one moment and then it disperses. And even when it comes back, it's never really the same group of people. It's some same, but not all. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And let's be clear. Mama has her moments. I'm not saying I'm perfect. Nobody is.
Of course.
But I definitely try to come with kindness and openness. And there really is nothing like that feeling of making sure everyone on that stage is invested in the thing that's happening in front of those cameras. Like there is a different energy than if people are all on their phone around or just thinking about lunch. It's like it makes for better stuff, just practically.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
And it's more fun. It just makes the day go by faster.
That's the one thing that people limit to is the long hours and the fact that the costume designer and the costume department is usually first on set and last to leave. That's another thing that kind of gets kind of, to a degree.
Every costume house I drive by, or like, the department I drive by on any set, in any soundstage or any like studio, I should say, the lights are always on. Doesn't matter what time. It's always on. And I'm like, oh my God, they're still there, or they're like, did they ever leave? Yeah. Always, always, always on. Always noted.
I think, that is really speaks to the necessity of the amount of work that it takes to do, make the costumes happen. But it's fueled by passion. I don't think that anybody who doesn't really want to be in that realm or isn't a costume person ends up working at that level or with that amount of concentration. It's like we as a costume designer, like I dream and eat and sleep and breathe whatever the ideas and the costumes are from the time that I get the job until the time I walk away. And, like with Agatha, I remember having an early conversation with Kathryn where I had done a lot of reading and a lot of thinking about the character, but she hadn't been given the scripts yet. And so we had a conversation where I was like, and I realized this in our phone call, and I was kind of like,
for the first 20 minutes.
And I have to, come to, offer ideas and sort of like, tease concepts, but leave space for you as the actor to have your own machinations and come up with things. And so that we can have this, layering of like, how about this idea? How about this idea? How about this idea?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a setup for sure. Cause I think even when you have those collaborations, like for me, when I work with the costume designer, it's the same thing. The costume designer has probably been on a few weeks before me. And then they're showing me all their mood boards and all the stuff and they're ready to go. They're like, let's get in there and draw. And I'm like, okay. And it's like, I was like, this is going to sound weird. I need to read the script first, because if I start drawing without understanding what I'm drawing, it just doesn't come out the same. But if I know like, oh, like on page whatever, Agatha does this, and I know maybe she's thinking this, then my drawing comes out better, right? Like, it's just a weird thing. Even if they're standing there in the costume, I know what that is. And I think that trickles down the line between all of those different collaborations. So it's like you have to provide room to grow. I'll tell you guys a story when you're talking about this specifically, and something that I experienced in terms of that actor costume designer relationship, which was I was working with Ruth Carter on Black Panther. And so we did that together. And
saw her.
Yes, you saw her at the party.
Yeah.
She's wonderful, but she was working on Shuri, and it was before the actor Letitia Wright was cast, right? So we had this colorful, fun, kind of like African, very like youthful, very youthful and fun, and all the things that it says in the script. And it was a bright orange vest and like a whole colorful palette underneath. But then when she was cast and they had a conversation, she realized how she was going to play her, and she felt like the costume being overstated was too much. So then if you notice in the movie, she's got the orange vest on, but everything else is black. And it's because there was also a collaboration again with Ruth, with the production designer, where she's like, oh, her lab has graffiti in it. It's got and it's going to be playing music. So it was just almost like too much. And so she pulled it back, but that's a decision that she made once she met the actor, right? So once they talked and then she saw just even a little bit of it, and then Letitia had time to process how she was going to play her, the costume changed. And I think that that's a really cool example. So I'm sure that you guys had many moments like that, especially at the very beginning where you've read everything, she hasn't read anything. I think that's a really good thing to bring up too in that collaboration and how that changes.
Yeah, flexibility seems imperative, turns out, on all sides. When something, because the moment you hold on to something too tightly, it's just gonna stop the flow. It just feels like, also it might not be, it might be like apples and oranges. They both be great, but the thing is an orange, and even though your whole idea is good, it's not an orange.
And I, as a designer, I need, like, in collaborating with Kathryn, like, I need to see you in the clothes. Like, I need to get them on you to learn the last pieces or to learn if it's going to work. And I mean, my experience of working with you is that, like, you're so embodied in your portrayals that when in the fitting room, you put even a t-shirt on Hahn and she's figuring it out, it's like I need to, that is information for me about what's right, or does it need more or does it need less? And so I think that having that precious time where we can sort of be, sculpting, as it were, is truly sacred. And we need that.
Especially early on. You guys, this was heaven.
Thank you very much for joining us.
I also have learned so much, and I thank you for. I mean, I'm so grateful for all of this information, and I'm so have your back.
Thank you so much for chiming in with us and just, talking about this. It's a big deal. And we've had your support in 2022 with, the past video that you made, and we're so grateful. And I'm so happy that we could share about our inner workings together and talk about this.
Yeah, whatever I can do, please. This just makes it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, people can, if people want to support the campaign and follow us, they can tune into our Instagram and our TikTok, which is Pay Equity Now. So it's just at Pay Equity Now. And they can also tag us with that handle or our hashtag, which is Naked Without Us, because the actors would be naked without us.
Yeah. And you only want to see that on a handful of occasions. And at the time.
She speaks from experience, folks.
Yes. Back in my day.
I have to, while we're ending, I have to give a shout out to the creator of our show, costume designer Marilyn Vance, and executive producer Martika Ibarra. And then also, again, the sponsor of this episode is the Pay Equity, or the Costume Designers Guild Pay Equity Committee. And just really thank you again to Daniel and Kathryn for showing up today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Phil. You're an awesome host.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed this.
I have to listen to all these now.
Please. Thank you very much, you guys.
Daniel, you know how much I love you, and
I love you more.
But I mean, even besides our friendship, this is clearly so important. So
Thanks for being here with us. It's so
Of course.
great to share this conversation with you, Phil. Thanks for leading us.
Thank you guys. Bye-bye.